North Korean leader Kim Jong-un calls South Korea its main enemy, saying he doesn't intend to avoid a war. We take a closer look at what his intentions are. South Korea's top office names the current Economic Security Secretary Wang Yoon as the newly created presidential advisor position in charge of economic security. Former UN Ambassador Cho Tae-er, meanwhile, was officially approved as the new foreign minister. The world's largest tech show is back in Las Vegas. We explain why artificial intelligence is making headlines this year. It's January 10th, 2024. This is Newscenter. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon. We start with North Korea continuing its threats. Its leader Kim Jong-un has labeled South Korea as the main enemy, adding he has no intention of avoiding war. The South Korean government was quick to downplay the remarks, saying they are an outdated tactic. Our defense correspondent Choi Min-jung takes a closer look at what's to come next.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has declared South Korea as the regime's main enemy and said he has no intention of avoiding war. This was said during his visit to munitions factories earlier this week, where he inspected what appeared to be missile vehicles for short-range ballistic missiles.
Declaring that the Republic of Korea is our main enemy, he said what we should focus on when it comes to the relations with a hostile state is to strengthen self-defense capabilities and nuclear war deterrence.
North Korea has called the South its main enemy a couple of times in the past, but this is the first time for Kim to directly declare South Korea as its principal enemy. Kim also threatened to, quote, completely destroy South Korea if it attempted to harm the regime's sovereignty and security. Seoul's Unification Ministry downplayed Kim's remarks as nothing more than an outdated tactic, saying that Kim had once again revealed his ambition to unify the two Koreas by force. It added that North Korea's emphasis on war preparations is evidence that it is fearful of Seoul and Washington's strengthening extended deterrence. The Foreign Ministry also denounced Kim's words, saying that South Korea has never initiated force against North Korea. However, concerns are growing as North Korea's provocations against the South do not seem to be stopping.
Looking at Kim's remarks, military tensions on the Korean peninsula are expected to increase significantly in 2024. We should expect a show of force when South Korea and the US conduct joint military exercises in March and August. We should also expect to see North Korea pressure the US at the highest level possible ahead of the US presidential election in November, causing tensions on the peninsula to escalate.
North Korea has recently been ramping up its hostility toward the South with artillery fire near the maritime border, following Kim's year-end statement defining the two Koreas as, quote, hostile nations at war with no chance of unification. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
The top security chiefs of Seoul and Washington have reaffirmed their commitment to bolstering the bilateral alliance following North Korea's recent provocations and its military cooperation with Russia. According to South Korea's presidential office, the newly appointed National Security Advisor Jang Ho-jin held his first phone call with his U.S. counterpart Jake Sullivan on Wednesday. Jang expressed his willingness to further develop their global comprehensive strategic alliance in various fields, while Sullivan reportedly said he would like to further strengthen the strong ROK-U.S. alliance this year. The two officials discussed North Korea's recent artillery firing into the West Sea and agreed that the regime's military collaboration with Moscow is a clear violation of Security Council resolutions. New names were unveiled today to steer the Yoon administration's economic security policies as the country looks to expand trade and diplomatic connections. Our Oh Soo-young has more on the reshuffle.
South Korea's top office named a new official in charge of economic security and a new trade minister as Seoul this year aims to ramp up its economic diplomacy. The presidential office on Wednesday announced the Yoon Suk-yeol administration's latest reshuffle of key government positions, beginning with the National Security Council. Incumbent Economic Security Secretary Won Yoon-jong was appointed to take the newly established position of the third Deputy National Security Advisor, given his diverse experience in academia, economic research and the business community, handling trade relations with the US and China. His position will be filled by An Tae-yeon, Professor of International Relations at the University of Seoul, known as an expert in global affairs and energy security. This comes after a series of new appointments made across the foreign affairs and trade ministries as key figures in the administration gear up to run for the April parliamentary elections. With a stronger focus on economic security, the administration has realigned its personnel to address new emerging challenges that affect the export-dependent country. It has cited supply chain disruptions and fierce global competition to master core technologies that ultimately determine both economic and military prowess. On that note, the president approved former ambassador to the United Nations Cho Tae-yeol as the new foreign minister, a day after Parliament adopted a confirmation report, a process required for ministerial positions. Yoon's office named former journalist and current Overseas Public Relations Secretary Kang In-sun as the second Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs, recognizing her familiarity with geopolitical affairs and public diplomacy. 3 other vice ministerial positions were also announced, including logistics and trade expert Jong-un as the new trade minister to lead negotiations and resolve sticking points in trade, replacing An Deok-gun, who was recently promoted to Minister of Trade, Industry and Energy. Incumbent second Vice Minister Kang Kyung-sung, currently in charge of industrial policy, took the first Vice Minister position, with ministry spokesperson Choi Nam-ho as his replacement. The top office on Wednesday also nominated Yoo Cheol-an, a former judge at the Seoul Central District Court, to lead the country's anti-corruption agency, which is a ministerial position requiring the National Assembly's approval. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
The World Bank projects global economic growth this year will slow further to mark a third year of weak expansion. Lee Seung-jae explains.
In its latest global economic prospects report released on Tuesday, the World Bank says global GDP is likely to grow 2.4% in 2024, slowing for a third year in a row. The latest forecast follows 6.2% growth in 2021, 3% in 2022, and 2.6% in 2023. The World Bank cited poverty and debilitating debt levels in many developing countries for the latest forecast. It also said that excluding the pandemic contraction in 2020, growth this year is set to be the weakest since the global financial crisis of 2009. It also added that due to the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, the war in Ukraine, and ensuing spikes in inflation and interest rates around the world, the first half of the 2020s is expected to be the worst half-decade performance in 30 years. Speaking to reporters, World Bank Deputy Chief Economist Ian Coase said global growth for 2020 to 2024 period would be weaker than the 2008-2009 global financial crisis, the Asian financial crisis of the late 1990s, and downturns in the early 2000s. Moving forward, the World Bank expects global growth in 2025 to rise to 2.7%, marked down from a June forecast of 3% due to anticipated slowdowns among advanced economies. Major economies around the world are also expected to see their growth slow, with the U.S. forecast to grow 1.6%, down from 2.5% last year, while China is also expected to see growth slow 4.5%, down from 5.2% last year. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
For the second month in a row, foreign investors became net buyers of South Korean stocks in December last year. According to data from the central bank on Wednesday, offshore investors last month bought a total net worth of $2.52 billion of domestic stocks. This means overseas investors have continued to buy more local shares than they sold, and the agency attributed this to optimistic forecasts for South Korean chipmakers and an ease in concerns over hawkish monetary policies. In 2023 overall, foreign investors purchased more than a net worth of $8 billion of local stocks, a turnaround after net selling in 2022 and 2021. House prices and aging plan cities have been a hot topic in South Korea recently. As the second part of the new open discussion with citizens for the new year, President Yoon pledged that old regulations will be scrapped and that redevelopment will come sooner and easier. Our Kim Do-yeon reports.
Homes that citizens want. That was the second topic of the government's open debate on Wednesday with citizens and government officials. New year, new format, with the debate replacing the conventional briefings to the president by each ministry in January. There, President Yoon Suk-yeol promised that aging planned cities like Ilsan, Gyeonggi-do province, where the discussion was held, will be redeveloped before the end of his term.
우선 우리 정부는 재개발, 재건축에 관한 규제를 아주 확 풀어버리겠습니다. 30년 이상 노후화된 주택은 안전진단 없이 바로 재건축에 착수할 수 있도록 하겠습니다.
This is because for an apartment to be reconstructed, it needs to fail a safety inspection. And as residents of old homes want them to be rebuilt, they want to fail. Other policies included expanding the floor ratio up to 500% and creating what's called Future City Fund for financing. He also addressed issues with multi-home ownership. Under the previous government, people with multiple homes were taxed heavily. The aim of this policy was to bring prices back down as South Korea's home prices skyrocketed in the early 2020s. President Yoon said such punitive taxing only shifted the burden to the tenants.
결국 그 피해를 서민들이 다 입게 됐습니다. 저희들은 이런 중과세를 철폐해서 서민들이 또 임차인들이 혜택을 입을 수 있도록 만들겠습니다.
He also underscored the importance of leaving politics and ideology out of the market. And when something is needed by the government, such as financing and relocation plans, that's when it acts. At the discussion were around 50 ordinary citizens, such as residents of homes that are in need of reconstruction, newlyweds, and young people looking to buy their first home to share their views on housing. In the meantime, he also took time to visit a 33-year-old apartment block in Ilsan. According to the top office, the apartment complex wasn't able to be rebuilt despite its nearly crumbling state due to current regulations. While looking around to check for what's needed when the redevelopment kicks off, President Yoon promised the residents there that a speedy process is on its way. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
On the local labor front, the country added more than 320,000 jobs last year, having recorded the highest employment rate. Those aged 60 and above in particular saw the biggest job increase, whereas there were fewer jobs for younger people. Park Go-nu has more.
South Korea's latest employment figures have been published and are showing positive signs. According to Statistics Korea on Wednesday, a total of 327,000 jobs were added on year in 2023, which was actually a drop from the year before. But that was mainly due to the base effect, as the jobs market recovered in 2022 following the easing of COVID-19 restrictions. 816,000 jobs were added that year. The employment rate for those aged 15 and above in 2023 rose 0.5 percentage points compared to the year before, to 62.6%. A record high since data was first compiled in 1963. An official from Statistics Korea said reduced COVID-19 restrictions increased demand, including at cafes and restaurants, while the need for caregivers, especially for seniors after the pandemic, helped to boost employment figures. By industry, sectors including the accommodation and food service sectors saw jumps in employment of around 11,000 after COVID-19 measures were eased last year. But the manufacturing and wholesale and retail fields saw employment figures drop due to shrinking exports and more online transactions, respectively. Those aged 60 and above saw the biggest increase in job additions, with 366,000 added, while the number of people in that age group working passed 6 million for the first time last year.
More people aged 60 and above and higher demand for employees in that age group in the health and welfare industry are factors behind job additions in the age group.
She added that despite fewer additions for people in their 20s, the employment rate for young adults was quite high, considering population decline in that age group. Meanwhile, 285,000 jobs were added in December 2023 alone, a rebound from November when the on-month numbers fell. Park Go-nu, Arirang News.
Korea's rapidly aging society has, for the first time, led to the number of people in their 70s surpassing the number of people in their 20s. The Ministry of the Interior and Safety says there were 6.31 million people in their 70s as of the end of last year, but just 6.19 million people in their 20s. This is the first time those in their 70s have overtaken those in their 20s since resident demographics were recorded in 2008. South Korea will likely enter what the UN defines as a super aging society next year. Korea's corporate heavyweights are in Las Vegas for the year's largest trade show, where artificial intelligence is taking center stage. Our business correspondent Shin Ha-young covers their product displays.
The world's largest annual tech show is back again. The 2024 edition of the Consumer Electronics Show, organized by the Consumer Technology Association in Las Vegas, commenced on Tuesday. As widely acknowledged, the key word of this year's CES is artificial intelligence integrated across a variety of industries.
With generative AI in the last year since it's come about, there's a lot of very rapid developments, companies going into new areas. It's like the internet itself. It's not just a technology, it's a fundamentally game-setting, changing technology.
LG Electronics believes AI should bring better customer experience that is more caring.
We all know AI stands for artificial intelligence, but at LG, we would like to redefine it as affectionate intelligence.
With over 400 exhibitors showcasing their latest breakthroughs in vehicle technology, the spotlight at the trade show is on future mobility powered by AI. South Korea's Hyundai Motor Group is participating on its largest scale ever, with both Hyundai Motor and Kia Motors making a noteworthy return after being absent the previous year. Hyundai Motor highlighted its commitment to leading human-centric life innovations. To do so, the company introduced its hydrogen value chain solution covering production and storage, transportation, and utilization. It has also announced its software-defined everything strategy, aiming to establish a mobility ecosystem that caters to users' needs anytime and anywhere through advanced software and AI. With an aim to go beyond the traditional concept of automobiles, Kia Motors unveiled its Platform Beyond Vehicle, or PBV for short, which can be turned into a delivery vehicle or a private office based on users' needs. Meanwhile, South Korea's second-largest conglomerate SK Group built a theme park at CES to highlight how technology can be applied to improve the world and address global challenges such as achieving net zero. One of its affiliates, SK Hynix, showcased advanced memory solutions that support generative AI applications. The 4-day event will run until Friday local time, bringing a diverse array of changes driven by AI to be used in daily life. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
The U.S. company that hoped to mark America's first private-led moon mission now says its lunar lander is unlikely to carry out its landing mission because of fuel leak. Yoon tells us more.
U.S. robotics firm Astrobotic has announced that its Peregrine lunar lander has no chance of a soft landing after a serious fuel leak about 7 hours after its launch. The moon mission was the first of its kind for a private U.S. company. But following its successful launch on Monday from Cape Canaveral, Florida, where the lunar lander successfully separated from the rocket, Astrobotic soon reported a propulsion system malfunction on the lander, which now has no hope left for success. Peregrine was attempting to become the first U.S. spacecraft to land on the moon since Apollo 17 in 1972. Meanwhile, NASA announced during a news conference on Tuesday that its Artemis program, which aims to return astronauts to the moon this decade, is facing some lengthy delays. The Artemis 3 mission to land humans on the moon for the first time since the Apollo program was previously set to complete this milestone by 2025. But it is now expected to not happen until at least September 2026. The space agency said that the primary reason for the delay includes 2 failed test flights in 2023. The tests in 2023 of Starship, which is the spacecraft that is expected to take astronauts from lunar orbits to the moon's south pole, both ended in explosions. Yoon, Arirang News.
In the Middle East, Israel's counteroffensive against the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah has led to the death of the group's drone unit commander. Choi Soo-hyung has the latest.
The Israel Defense Forces said on Tuesday that they killed a commander of the militant group Hezbollah's drone unit. IDF spokesperson Dania Hagari said they killed Ali Hussein Bouzi, who had led drone attacks on northern Israel. Hagari mentioned that the attack was a targeted drone strike on a vehicle by Israeli air forces. On Monday, a senior commander of Hezbollah's secretive Radwan force, Wazim al-Tawil, was killed in an Israeli airstrike. Meanwhile, International Organization for Migration reported on Tuesday that more than 76,000 residents in southern Lebanon have fled the area as the tensions are increasing between Hezbollah and Israel. UK newspaper The Guardian has reported that hundreds of refugees are arriving every day in Lebanon's southern coastal city of Tyre, with fears of a possible recurrence of the conflict between Israel and Lebanon in 2006. Amid the growing conflicts, United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken is visiting the Middle East. In a meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Blinken emphasized avoiding further civilian harm in Gaza. He also stated that the U.S. will stand with Israel, but called for aid to Gaza and fewer civilian losses.
This immense human toll is one of the many reasons that we continue to stand with Israel in ensuring that October 7th can never happen again. It's also why we're intensely focused on bringing the remaining hostages home, addressing the humanitarian crisis, and strengthening protection for civilians in Gaza, and preventing the conflict from spreading.
Blinken's visit to the Middle East is his fourth since the current conflict between Israel and Hamas militant group broke out in October. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News.
To K-pop news now, the album Golden by BTS member Jong-un has stayed in the U.S. Billboard 200 chart for longer than any other K-pop solo album. In the chart's latest update on Tuesday local time, Golden ranked 28th, now spending its 9th consecutive week on Billboard's main albums chart. His bandmate V set the previous record of 8 weeks last year with his album Layover. The Billboard 200 chart ranks the week's most popular albums in the U.S. based on album sales and online streaming.
Most of the snow and rain from yesterday has moved away. However, an uninvited smoke from overseas has flowed in behind the snow clouds. The Seoul metropolitan area, as well as the Chungcheongdo and Jeollado provinces, are expected to have bad levels of ultrafine dust tomorrow. Other areas are expected to have normal levels. However, Daegu and Gyeongsangbuk-do province will temporarily see bad levels of ultrafine dust in the morning. Proper fine dust mask is essential. Tomorrow night, snow or rain will make a return from Gangwon-do province. For the time being, there will be no severe cold beyond the usual temperatures. However, there will be many slippery roads as they are frozen as a result of the recent snow and rain. Please continue to be careful out on the roads. Morning temperatures will hover around the seasonal average. Seoul will start off at -4, along with Daejeon and Gyeongju. Highs in Seoul will get up to 5 degrees, Gyeongju and Busan 10 degrees Celsius. Another round of rain or snow will appear in the center part of the country on Sunday. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is Newscenter for tonight. Thank you for watching. A panel session coming up.
한국에 오면 먹어야죠. 먹어도 먹어도 끝이 없는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 하나, 둘, 셋.
Hey, Mr. Cupid, who's lying? Make sure you listen to what I say. I may be stupid or quite naive.
끝없이 쏟아지는 포토스팟. 휴대폰 한 대로 감당할 수 있겠니?
Arrow straight through my heart.
Fact of the matter is, he was a kid who just didn't have a loving home, and once he experienced a loving home, he wanted to keep it, you know? He wanted to stay away from his friends who were like kind of really rude and disrespectful and kind of felt tied to them. You could tell towards the end he didn't want to be in that situation anymore.
아이씨, 집에서 설명할게요. 너도 나가, 이씨. 아, 진짜 불쌍하죠.
Hello everyone, it's Wednesday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. The main enemy, after defining the two Koreas as hostile countries in a state of war, other threatening remarks have come from the mouth of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. This was while he was making a two-day visit to a munitions plant earlier this week. North Korea has been escalating tensions more than ever by firing artillery shells into waters off its western coast for 3 consecutive days. And this led South Korea to declare there will no longer be a buffer zone between the two Koreas, scrapping the inter-Korean military agreement that was made on September 19, 2018. What could Kim Jong-un's intentions be behind such moves? For this, we have invited Dr. Go Myung-hyun, a senior fellow from the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. Dr. Go, welcome.
It's good to be here.
And we also have Chris Reddy, correspondent at NK News Seoul. Good to have you with us, Chris.
Thank you for having me.
All right, first things first. Dr. Go, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, he inspected major munitions factories, and there he said South Korea is the regime's main enemy. Are such remarks usual ones?
Well, it wasn't really usual a couple of years ago, even though North Korea never really expressed positive feelings towards South Korea. He had, he also using like personal monikers against the South Korean leadership, such as President Moon, President Yoon, including President Park before. So in that sense, the North Korea's use of like a expression main enemy is only unusual in the sense that using such a term. North Korea would characterize South Korea as a stooge, or like a rebels or rebels, and very negative expressions. But then in a way, recently North Korea has upgraded the level of adversity towards adversary level against South Korea by calling it a main enemy, so which oftentimes North Korea reserved for the United States. So I think this is intended on the part of North Korea to essentially raise tension, obviously, but also to indicate that the level of confrontation between the two Koreas is very drastic. So I think North Korea is trying to contrast the idea of the idea of inter-Korean reconciliation that many South Koreans aspire to have or realize with this abrupt change of attitude towards South Korea, to show, to highlight the contrast and thereby using this rhetoric to raise tension and in a way indirectly mount pressure on South Korea.
All right, I see your point. Now, such remarks came after North Korea's military unleashed hundreds of artillery shells off its western coast for 3 consecutive days. We are going to talk about the details, but could you first walk us through the events?
Right, so it all began on Friday morning when North Korea essentially launched around 200 shells into the waters of in the western waters of the Korean Peninsula, so very close to islands near South Korean islands near the maritime border. Now, all the shells all landed on the northern side of the northern limit line separating the two countries, but South Korea saw this as a provocation, particularly coming so soon after North Korea withdrew from an inter-Korean military agreement. And in response, South Korea held artillery drills of its own and issued warnings to residents of the island, of one of the islands of Yeonpyeongdo, to take shelter. South Korea framed this as a provocative act that threatens peace on the Korean Peninsula, but North Korea responded later the same day, denying that its shells, that the islands, South Korean islands, were ever in any danger from the North Korean shells, and instead blamed South Korea for aggravating tensions. And so that was on Friday itself. And then on Saturday, North Korea followed up with 6 drills involving 60 more shells. And on Sunday, around 90. That's what the South Korean military reported.
All right, thank you for your summary, Shiz. Now, Dr. Go, could there have been a specific reason why the North chose to fire artillery shells instead of usual, missiles, and why the provocations in the first place?
Well, this latest round of provocations by North Korea is intended to continue this blame game that started after South Korea declared that September 19th comprehensive military agreement is basically dead. So we knew that this was, this CMA or the comprehensive military agreement was in effect dead for many years due to North Korean repeated provocations. But then also there was a concern that whoever officially withdrew from this agreement will have to be blamed for it. So the two Koreas essentially engaged in this playing game. And what North Korea has done is to, by using the artillery instead of using the missiles, it made it very clear that this provocation is about the CMA rather than, say, a relationship with the United States or pressuring the United States to come to the negotiation table to restart the denuclearization negotiations, for instance. So essentially limiting the scope of the provocation and making sure this is actually a political game that the North Korea is playing against the South. So even though the noise is very loud with the artillery shells and so the tension is mounting, essentially this is going to remain a political game, a game of shifting blames between the two Koreas.
Oh, I see. So only the reason why North Korea chose artillery shells was to show that this September 19th agreement is now terminated.
Exactly.
All right. Now, interestingly, the sister of Kim Jong-un, Kim Yo-jong, claimed that the artillery shells that the South Korean military accused the North of firing on Saturday, was it, were in fact just the sounds of explosives. But this was just a lie, was it?
Well, yeah, so as you noted, Kim Yo-jong issued a statement saying that the exercise on Saturday, and bear in mind, only the ones on Saturday, were a deception operation aimed at deceiving and embarrassing the South Korean military by triggering essentially a false alert, saying that we deceived your systems, your detection systems. And to back this up, North Korean state media also released a video showing soldiers digging holes and laying and eventually setting off explosives. But South Korea's military pretty much, South Korea and the government dismissed this entire operation as, or this message as psychological warfare, and said essentially, no matter what they say, we know that there were artillery shells fired, and certainly that it seems very unlikely that North Korea would be able to deceive all of South Korea's detection mechanisms simply through setting off explosives in a field somewhere, because it's not just the sound of explosives that North Korea detects. It also, that South Korea detects. It's also splashdowns in the sea. It's also the origin and path of the missiles. So no matter what, chances are, if South Korea detected actual artillery shells being fired into the sea, then certainly that seems likely to have happened.
Right. Well, as our show has already pointed out, Dr. Go, the Joint Chiefs of Staff said such remarks are nothing more than a rudimentary form of psychological warfare in order to undermine South Korea's military capabilities. How did you see this view?
Yeah, I was laughing at the Kim Yo-jong statement because, as Shreyas indicated, so South Korean military has definite absolute superiority when it comes to the conventional capabilities. So in that part of the Korean Peninsula, what South Korean military has deployed is a very effective anti-artillery radars. So what these radars do is essentially detect the launch of artillery shells. They track the trajectory of the artillery shells, and then they can even forecast where these artillery shells will land. So so it's not just the sound of the firing of the artillery that the South Korean military has detected. It's also the trajectory of these shells. So there are very clear data indicating that the North Koreans have carried out, indeed, artillery exercises with shells landing in the sea. So what Kim Yo-jong is trying to do here is, as a Joint Chief of Staff have rightly indicated, is engaging in very petty, childish psychological warfare. So what Kim Yo-jong is trying to do is to undermine the credibility of the South Korean military and at the same time boost the morale of the North Korean one. So it's very basic though. So I think it's not going to have a material impact anywhere. It just shows that the North Koreans, again, are using this occasion, as a part of the political game.
All right, I see. Now, Shirz, I'd like to talk more about September 19th agreement. I think you have already mentioned this, but artillery shells landed in the waters north of the northern limit line within the designated buffer zone that was mutually agreed by the two Koreas through the September 19th agreement. And so South Korean military announced that the agreement is now practically terminated. Could you tell us more about this?
Well, I think the important thing to note, first of all, is that it isn't officially terminated yet. But what this does is reinforce the message that effectively the South Korean Defense Ministry gave after North Korea withdrew from the agreement in late November. So North Korea completely backed out after South Korea suspended one provision. And so at the time, the South said, for all practical purposes now, North Korea is already completely out of this agreement, which means a bilateral agreement does not really hold much weight when one side is completely out of it. But South Korea still has to follow processes. It still is in the agreement officially. And as the Defense Ministry stated yesterday, completely withdrawing from the agreement will need consultation between several ministries. Lots of more steps need to be taken, and that will take time. That said, certainly South Korea's initial move of dropping that one provision early on, which is related to a no-fly buffer zone between the two Koreas, that effectively has at least opened the door for these discussions. And certainly with last week's artillery drills again near the border and increasing evidence, visual evidence that South Korea might be moving to restore guard posts, it does seem that there is that possibility that in the coming weeks and months, we might see more progress being made towards eventually suspending more provisions, maybe even the entire agreement.
All right, I see. Now, Dr. Go, up till now, we have been talking about these artillery shells, but the word is that North Korea will continue with different types of provocations this year, including the 7th nuclear test. What is your forecast, and in what ways should South Korea tackle with this?
Well, it is expected North Korea will make a lot of noise this year, mainly because this is a year where important elections are taking place, both in South Korea, in the form of the general elections for the selection of the National Assembly members in April, as well as the presidential elections in November in the United States. So oftentimes this is the occasion where North Korea is trying to flex its muscles so that it's essentially taking advantage of the global attention when it's focused in the Korean Peninsula as well as in Washington. And when it comes to the United States, especially, North Korea wants to complete the weapons development, which oftentimes involves tests that are considered to be provocations by the United States and the international community before there's a new government, new administration takes place in Washington next year. So that's the reason why there's a very high chance that North Korea will mount a series of increasing level of provocation throughout this year. And one of the provocations that many are concerned about is obviously the nuclear test, because this is something that North Korea had hinted at for a very long time, but hasn't carried out. But then the timing is too good for them. So in order to maximize the impact of such a provocation, there's a concern that North Korea might indeed carry out the test this year. So, but then again, this is a part of the North Korea's typical provocation strategy of starting gradually from small provocation and raising the ante with increasingly higher intensity provocations down the road. So chances that North Korea might carry out the much feared 7th nuclear test sometime between summer and November this year.
All right, I see. It will continue with different types of provocations in order to boost its leverage. All right, shifting gears to international politics, Triaz. On the same day that North Korea fired more than 200 artillery shells, Kim Jong-un sent a letter of condolence to Japan after the earthquake hit Japan. Were there previous cases of North Korea leader, sending such a letter to Japan?
Well, typically North Korean leaders send such letters of condolence to the leaders of nations with which they are friendly. So, for example, the same day, Kim Jong-un sent a letter to the leader of Iran. But Japan obviously does not have the best relations with North Korea. So this is the first time that a North Korean leader has sent such a letter directly to the Japanese Prime Minister. Now, there have been other occasions when North Korea has expressed sympathy in some other way. For example, the closest equivalent we have to something like this was in 1995, when after the Great Hanshin earthquake, North Korea's then premier sent a letter to the Japanese Prime Minister expressing sympathy. But apart from that, there haven't been any letters to Japanese leaders. We have seen in 2011, Kim Jong-un, the then nominal head of state of North Korea, sent a similar letter to Jong-un, which is the pro-DPRK organization representing ethnic Koreans in Japan. And the DPRK Red Cross has on a couple of occasions sent sympathies to its Japanese counterpart. But leader to leader hasn't happened, even during periods of diplomacy. For example, in the early 2000s, when North Korea and Japan held a couple of summits, while the Red Cross sent a letter to its counterpart in 2004, Kim Jong-il sent no such letter to Junichiro Koizumi, who was then leader of Japan. So on the whole, I think it's not something that they would usually do.
I see. So based on what you has told us, this letter is indeed a rare one, right?
Yes.
Dr. Go, regarding this, many say North Korea's goal was to just weaken the trilateral cooperation. What is your view?
So this is I think this episode demonstrates that North Korea has a very sophisticated understanding of this dynamic that's going on between the three allies here, Korea, Japan, and the United States. I think, North Korea understands that if North Korea were to start a negotiation or talk with the United States, we would like to have a close ally of the United States on each side, essentially acting as a spokesman. And that was the function that the previous South Korean President Moon Jae-in had on behalf of Kim Jong-un to continue the dialogue between Trump and Kim Jong-un from 2017 to 2019. And so I think what North Korea is trying to do is finding a potential partner for a potential round of negotiation with possibly a new U.S. administration next year. So, and then Japan thankfully has a need for this, because we know that the LDP, the Liberal Democratic Party of Japan, the ruling party of Japan, for many, many years, has had this objective of resolving the long-standing abductee issue. And with abductee issues about the Japanese citizens that have been abducted during Kim Jong-il years to be trainers for North Korean spies. And only very few have returned to the motherland. So I think what North Korea is trying to do is essentially put out an incentive on the Japanese side to engage North Korea, perhaps to resolve the abductee issue, but as a result, bypass the South Koreans, isolating the South Korean government diplomatically. So I think it's also hinting at that this is some sort of a back-channel dialogue is going on already between Japan and North Korea. And this, in a way, is going to create a little bit of a friction between Seoul and Tokyo. And I think the North Koreans know this exactly, so therefore it's using such expression at this time to create this friction.
All right, I see. Now, as our Dr. Go already mentioned, considering that Tokyo has long been looking for diplomatic resolutions regarding North Korea's abductions of Japanese citizens, is there any possibility Pyongyang and Tokyo's relationship would significantly improve this year?
Well, I think the first thing of course to note is that this is just an initial outreach. Certainly, it's a positive gesture from Kim Jong-un, but it doesn't necessarily mean North Korea wants to engage with Japan. But it is worth waiting and watching. It's if there's more that comes out from both sides in particular. And as Dr. Go mentioned, there have been reports over the past year of back-channel communications between Tokyo and Pyongyang. So I think a lot will depend on how they build on this and how they interact. But we're still a long way away from further diplomacy, despite Prime Minister Fumio Kishida's constant refrain that he would want to meet with Kim Jong-un face-to-face to resolve the abduction issue and other historical divides. For now, North Korea still regards Japan as a historical enemy. It's always been the case, and at the moment, certainly, we're seeing a big divide geopolitically, Japan aligned with the US and South Korea, North Korea very much on the other side of that divide. That said, certainly this is, as I mentioned, a positive move from North Korea, and Japan also thanked Kim Jong-un for the message. So a lot will depend on what Japan does next. If perhaps North Korea thinks Japan is taking what it would consider practical steps to build relations, maybe, for example, working with easing conditions for Jong-un-affiliated schools in Japan, where they've often faced a lot of problems, or perhaps engaging through other channels. For example, next month, I think there's a possibility that there's a high probability that the Japanese women's football team will visit Pyongyang. So there are other options for engagement going on. And so if both sides see potential for it, there may be some prospects, but certainly at the moment, they stand very far apart.
All right, I see. Now, Dr. Go, I believe this will be our last question. Quite briefly, given that there are so many schedules for this year, if North Korea improves its ties with Tokyo and Washington, what position would South Korea be forced into?
So I think this kind of dynamic has taken place before in this part of the world, where North Korea tries to engage in the United States directly, for instance, or Japan. We have seen that before. With, in fact, the former Japanese Prime Minister, Koizumi, visited North Korea to have a very fast and incredible dramatic rapprochement, and in fact, also part of the historical reconciliation plan between two countries, but failed because the abductee issue came up. We know that North Korea tried to do that again with the former U.S. President Donald Trump, but failed again. So we know that there are clearly limitations to this kind of initiative on the part of North Korea to isolate South Korea diplomatically. And the reason is because at the end of the day, North Korea is essentially a rogue state, have engaged in abduction of foreign nationals. It's still developing nuclear weapons against international security rules. So I think these structural factors essentially puts a very strong constraint what North Korea can do diplomatically against the South Koreans. So I think that's the reason why we might have some little bit of tension or friction among allies, but it's not going to be long-lasting by any means.
All right, I see your point. Well, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Dr. Go.
It was my pleasure.
And thank you, Shiraz, for your time and insights. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.